The words cracked through the air like a slap, sharp and venomous. "Get out of here right now! We do not serve your kind!" The whispers died instantly. The orchestra froze mid-note, and the entire grand hall of Wellington Estate felt as if a poisonous wind had swept through, pulling every gaze toward one single point, Ariana Cole. Standing at the center of the gilded room, beneath crystal chandeliers that glowed like glass suns, Ariana remained still, her eyes deep and calm, like a lake before a storm. Her elegant navy blue dress, simple and refined, stood out amid a sea of glittering gowns and perfectly tailored tuxedos. Yet to these people her simplicity was a crime, and her skin was a sentence. No one knew who she was. No one cared. All they saw was a woman who, in their eyes, did not belong in their world. Tiffany Wellington drifted forward like a velvet-wrapped dagger, her thin smile gleaming as sharp as a blade. She approached Ariana each step, dripping with the thrill of humiliating a stranger. "Staff use the back door. Are you lost, darling?" She purred, her voice sweet as honey laced with poison. Laughter shattered like glass across the marble floor. Ariana did not react. She did not bow her head. She did not turn away. Her spine was a steel rod, her stillness so steady it made the room tense without knowing why. Every breath she took carried years of patience, forged in battles no one in this golden palace had ever faced. But what stung her was not Tiffany's smirk. It was the memories rising like old ghosts. At 21, stopped by security, outside a scholarship gala, because she didn't look like a guest. At 27, forced to wait, while a 5-star hotel receptionist called her bank, because she assumed Ariana's credit card was stolen. At 33, standing in a Tokyo boardroom as an entire panel of male executives ignored her, until the revenue numbers she presented hit them like a slap. Every humiliation, drop by drop, had fueled the fire inside her that never went out. And tonight it was being stoked again, right in the middle of a $100 million estate, where the city's most powerful people treated her like entertainment. Carter Wellington, face flushed with wine, and empty pride, approached with a glass of red in hand. He lifted it under the chandelier, swirling the dark liquid as if preparing for a ritual. Then, with deliberate cruelty, he tipped his wrist. The wine poured like blood, splashing across Ariana's dress. Red blooming, spreading fast like a wound being torn open. A chorus of gasps, then applause. Applause for cruelty. Applause for humiliation. Applause for a performance they believed placed them at the top of the world. In the noise, only one person stood, frozen in the corner, Liam Barnes, the young server gripping an empty tray, his hands trembling. He had read Ariana's name hours earlier, while checking the guest list. Ariana Cole, priority guest, number 1, notify immediately. She was not just a guest. She was the most important guest at the entire event, and they were treating her like an intruder. Liam swallowed hard, heart-pounding eyes widening, as Carter poured a second wave of wine onto Ariana's dress, and the room erupted in laughter again. He wanted to speak up, but fear held him still. Fear of losing his job, fear of Tiffany, fear of the Wellington power, fear of the entire glittering crowd. Ariana stood unmoving. The cold wine seeped through the fabric, its scent mixing with expensive perfumes like a branded insult. But when she finally lifted her gaze, the look in her eyes was no longer repressed anger. It was the still surface of a lake, moments before a storm breaks. "You should know your place," Eleanor Wellington sneered, raising her glass, like raising a verdict for someone beneath their class. Ariana set her water glass down gently on the marble table. The tiny click it made seemed soft, but in that suffocating silence, it sounded like a trigger being pulled. Her eyes sharpened. Her voice emerged quiet, steady, slicing through the air like steel. "Everything you have done tonight you will pay for." The room burst into laughter, as if she had told a joke. But Liam felt a chill crawl up his spine. He heard what no one else heard. That was not a threat. It was a sentence. Ariana pulled out her phone. One simple swipe. One quiet command. "Activate Protocol 7. On the other end, a professional voice responded immediately. "Protocol 7 activated. Executive Board is online. Emergency documents ready for approval." Ariana closed her eyes for a brief moment, her lashes trembling, with the effort of holding back a storm of perfectly controlled fury. Tiffany laughed loudly, pointing at Ariana, like mocking an amateur actor trying to play a role she was not qualified for. Oh, how cute. "Calling an Uber for your ride home." Ariana opened her eyes. Her stare was so sharp, Tiffany instinctively stepped back half a pace, without knowing why. In that moment, while the entire room basked in its own arrogance, no one except Ariana and Liam understood that within minutes, the entire Wellington empire would be torn apart right before their eyes. And then the storm began to turn. No one noticed. No one braced themselves. Because they still believed they were kings inside this crystal palace. They had no idea they had just pulled the lever that would open the gates to their own downfall, and tonight would not belong to the Wellington family. It would belong to Ariana Cole, the woman they dared to humiliate publicly, the woman they should never have touched, the woman holding the verdict for their entire empire. No one in the gilded grand hall of Wellington Estate realized the exact moment their world began to crack, but Liam Barnes did. The instant Ariana Cole whispered, "Activate Protocol 7, he felt the air shift dense and heavy, like the sky moments before a powerful storm. The guests kept laughing, kept raising their glasses as if they had just witnessed a lavish performance in which they believed themselves to be the privileged spectators looking down from above. But Liam sensed something entirely different. Ariana's calm was so sharp, it made even those standing closest to her tremble, though none of them understood why. Across the room, Eleanor Wellington lifted a glass of white wine, her triumphant smile stretched thin and cruel across her face, a symbol of inherited power. Did you all hear that she laughed loudly? She thinks one phone call can change anything in this room. But Ariana did not look at Eleanor. Her gaze was fixed on Carter, who was brushing wine stains off his sleeve, his smirk still dripping with arrogance, as if he had just granted some twisted privilege. Carter's lips curled as he stepped forward, ready to fling out another insult. But right then, his phone buzzed violently in his pocket. And it was not just his. Tiffany, Eleanor, and more than 10 other major guests all received notifications at once. A ripple of unrest swept across the hall, like a gust of wind racing through a field before it bursts into flame. Tiffany frowned as she checked her screen. A second later, her face drained of color. Meanwhile, Ariana remained perfectly still, the only person who seemed to understand exactly what was unfolding. Moments later, Liam's phone buzzed too. He glanced down. A leaked internal alert from Wellington Group blazed across his screen. Emergency, the entire $5 billion investment portfolio, is under review for severe ethical violations. Funds temporarily frozen. Liam looked up at Ariana, then at the Wellington family, now spiraling into panic. His fear dissolved into stunned realization. She was not the outsider being humiliated. She was the person holding the financial lifeline of their entire empire. The room split in two, one side filled with the wealthy, draped in the illusion of power, now scattering like an overturned anthill, and the other side dominated by Ariana, standing calm and immovable, like a steel pillar in the eye of the storm. The fear on every Wellington face was unmistakable. Eleanor blinked rapidly, rereading the alert as if hoping it was a mistake. Carter cursed under his breath as he scrambled through his inbox. Tiffany trembled so hard that the wine in her glass sloshed onto the floor. Then Ariana spoke, her voice soft, yet powerful enough to make the entire room freeze. "I warned you." Several guests exchanged uneasy glances. For the first time that night, the arrogance etched on their faces began to crack. Eleanor shouted back, "This is nonsense. No one has the authority to freeze Wellington Group's assets." But before she could continue, her phone rang. She answered with her usual tone of command. "This is Eleanor Wellington. I demand." A voice on the other end interrupted, brisk and cold. "Mrs. Wellington, all accounts are under investigation. We cannot fulfill your request." Eleanor went still, not because of the refusal, but because the voice held no fear, no deference. For the first time in her life, someone spoke to her as if she were ordinary. Ariana turned to Tiffany, her expression free of anger, only carrying the final judgment for someone who never imagined her actions could have consequences. Why are you doing this?" Tiffany whispered. Ariana answered slowly, "I am not doing anything. You did this to yourselves." The words cut deeper than any blade, sending a chill through everyone who heard them. From the far side of the room, Robert Hale stepped forward. He was one of the few guests who had looked at Ariana with genuine respect earlier in the evening. "Ms. Cole," he said quietly, clearly, "I believe it is time you tell them the truth." Ariana inclined her head, then turned to face the entire room. Her eyes shone with the fierce resolve of someone who had endured far too much and finally chose to rise. "I am not a stranger." The room froze. "I am the largest investor of Wellington Group. I signed every project you are celebrating tonight, and I am the person you spilled wine on, mocked and laughed at." Audible gasps spread through the hall. Some guests lowered their phones, terrified of being recorded reacting poorly. "Impossible," Eleanor whispered, stepping back as if Ariana had revealed some monstrous truth. "You are lying." Ariana met her eyes. "Then call your bank." Eleanor's fingers shook as she dialed, but the call did not go through. Every account was locked. Ariana continued, "I once believed discrimination belonged to an older generation, but tonight you showed me it is still alive, still thriving, still vicious." Guests who had laughed earlier now lowered their heads, unable to face her. At that moment, Liam finally gathered his courage. He stepped forward, his voice shaking but firm. "I saw her name on the VIP list. She did not sneak in. She was the primary guest of this event. And everything tonight has been recorded." The room erupted. Eleanor snapped toward him. "Be quiet, you know nothing." But for the first time ever, Liam was not afraid. "I know the truth, and I cannot stand with what is wrong." Ariana looked at him, her gaze softening for the first time. Not because of his words, but because he dared to speak them in a room suffocating with privilege. Tiffany glanced around, nearly in tears. "Ariana, you are not going to destroy my family, are you?" Ariana replied, in a voice calmer than silence itself. "I am not destroying anything. I am simply returning what you have sown." A tremor swept through the hall. A new alert arrived on every guest's phone. Breaking news: Wellington family accused of discrimination. Assets frozen, key investor withdraws $5 billion. In that moment, everyone understood that the empire they believed untouchable was collapsing before their eyes. But what terrified them even more was Ariana's silence, a silence more powerful than any scream, the silence of someone who had lived through too much pain to ever fear again. And then, amid the chaos, Ariana's phone buzzed once more. She raised it to her ear, listened for a few seconds, then delivered one sentence that made the entire room stagger. Proceed to Phase 3. Anyone who understood financial power turned pale immediately. Because Phase 3 was not a warning, it was a verdict. And this was only the beginning. The once vibrant gold-leafed ballroom had fallen into a suffocating silence, thick and heavy, as if the air itself had been drained away. Every gaze locked onto Ariana Cole, but no longer with the contempt they had shown earlier. Now their eyes held the primal fear of people who had just realized they had provoked a force far beyond anything they were capable of resisting. When she uttered the command, "Proceed to Phase 3," the entire Wellington estate seemed to shudder in a single chaotic breath. Eleanor Wellington gripped the edge of the table, her eyes wide with panic, her lips trembling as if refusing to believe what she had just heard. Tiffany stumbled back a full step, her hand covering her mouth like she had just watched her own soul leave her body. Carter stared at Ariana, then at his phone, then at Ariana again, like a dethroned prince suddenly shoved off the pedestal he thought was carved for him alone. Ariana, however, stood unmoving, her eyes sharp as a blade, her expression so calm it chilled the room. Anyone looking at her would have thought she was a judge delivering a sentence, not a woman who had been publicly humiliated less than half an hour earlier. Then the phones of every important guest erupted in a chorus of vibrations, a death knell echoing through the hall. Internal memos, emergency emails, financial alerts, legal warnings, all flashing across screens in seconds, like a flood bursting through a broken dam. All Wellington Group credit accounts are under review. Personal assets of the Wellington family are temporarily restricted. The $5 billion investment has been frozen. Partners request immediate explanation. Faces turned pale, and several guests stepped back instinctively, as if simply standing too close to the Wellingtons could make them accomplices in what was quickly becoming one of the greatest financial implosions the city had ever seen. The entire ballroom filled with anxious whispers, sharp gasps, and the choking breaths of those witnessing an empire tremble in the middle of its own glittering celebration. Carter was the first to lose control. "No, this is impossible. This is a scam. A coincidence," he shouted, his voice scratching like a drowning man clawing at the air. But his outburst only made him look more pathetic, more desperate. Ariana stepped forward, not fast, not slow, but with a measured precision that squeezed the breath out of the room. "You think an empire falls because of a coincidence," she said, her voice level, cutting through the chaos like a clean line of steel. "No, Carter. This collapse began with your family's arrogance. Tonight was simply the final drop." Tiffany collapsed into the nearest chair, her hands shaking uncontrollably. She stared up at Ariana with wide, tear-filled eyes. "Ariana, I was wrong. I did not know who you were." "I did not know. And if I were no one at all," Ariana replied, her voice devoid of mercy, "if I had simply been an ordinary woman who happened to walk into this party, What would you have done? Tonight is not about who I am. It is about who you are." Her words hit like cold water to the face. Several guests turned away, ashamed because they knew. They knew they had laughed. They had watched. They had stood with crossed arms as cruelty unfolded before them. Liam now stood closest to Ariana, his heart pounding, his eyes filled with awe, and something deeper, something like reverence. He had never seen anyone stand this tall in a pit of power and cruelty, not because of their status, but because of their integrity. Ariana Eleanor finally managed trying to reclaim the composure of a powerful hostess, though her trembling voice betrayed her. "If there has been a misunderstanding, we can—" "There is no misunderstanding," Ariana cut in. "Only truth." At that moment, Ariana's phone rang the screen, lighting up with words that made even those nearby suck in a sharp breath. "Board emergency conference ready for authorization." Ariana pressed the speakerphone. A voice came through the line, cold, precise, and emotionless, each word like a nail hammered into the foundation of the Wellington Empire. "Ms. Cole, Phase 3 is complete. All collaborative contracts between Wellington Group and our system have been suspended. We are preparing to release the press statement, awaiting your confirmation." Carter panicked. "No, wait. Please. We can negotiate. We can—" Ariana looked at him, and the glance alone silenced him. "Confirm," she said. And that was the moment the entire ballroom cracked open. Several women covered their mouths as tears slipped down. Some men sank into their chairs, whispering frantic prayers. Dozens of guests lifted their phones to record understanding. They were witnessing a moment that would be etched into financial history. The Wellington family, once the very symbol of power and prestige, was being dismantled, not by a rival corporation, but by the very woman they had mocked and drenched in wine. Ariana looked around the room, her gaze gliding across every face, every flicker of emotion. Not out of satisfaction, but out of clarity. The empire they believed was carved from stone had always been nothing more than a sand castle, and tonight the winds of justice had finally swept it away. Liam stepped forward, his voice small but unwavering. "Miss Cole, I am sorry for what they did. Not everyone here is like them." Ariana turned to him, and her eyes softened for a single precious moment. "I know," she said, "and it is because of people like you that I chose to do all of this." Behind them, Eleanor called out, her voice breaking apart Ariana. "Please do not destroy my family." Ariana faced her one last time, not with anger, not with hatred, but with a truth so stark it silenced the room. "I did nothing, Eleanor. You destroyed yourselves the moment you believed you had the right to be cruel." Before anyone could speak another word, Ariana's phone vibrated again, signaling the next turning point, one no one in that room dared imagine. But Ariana was ready, because tonight justice had only just begun. The moment Ariana's phone vibrated again, the entire gleaming ballroom of Wellington Estate seemed to fall into a different layer of reality, one so tense that you could practically hear the heartbeat of anyone standing close to her. The crystal lights reflected off the panic, twisting across every guest's face, some pale as marble, some sweating through their designer suits, some trembling so hard they nearly dropped their glasses. But Ariana didn't tremble. She stood tall, her gaze razor-sharp and impossibly calm like a conductor, guiding an orchestra that had no idea it was already playing the final movement of its own requiem. When she lifted the phone to her ear, the room grew so silent that the soft rustle of her sleeve brushing against her dress sounded thunderous. Miss Cole, the man's voice on the line, said, "Deep, steady, and professional. Phase 4 is prepared. We are awaiting your final command." A few breaths caught in throats across the hall. Eleanor Wellington clutched the arm of her chair so tightly her knuckles turned white. Tiffany shook her head over and over her lips, quivering as if she were moments from fainting. Carter staggered backward, knocking into a table and sending a cascade of wine glasses shattering across the floor, the sharp sound ringing out like a verdict. But Ariana still did not answer. She held the phone close, but her eyes were locked on the Wellington family, on the people who had lived their lives without ever learning the meaning of the word sorry, who had never known humility, who had never once been held accountable for the harm they caused. "Ariana, please." Eleanor's voice came out cracked and desperate, stripped of every ounce of superiority she once carried like a crown. "We can talk. We can resolve this civilly." The desperation on her face made a few guests look away in discomfort. But Ariana did not look away. She had endured too many moments of being treated as invisible, inferior, unworthy. Tonight they would face the very darkness they had carelessly thrown onto others. Civilly, Ariana repeated her voice, low but piercing each word, landing like an arrow in the suffocating air. "Pouring wine on me is civil. Mocking my existence is civil. Throwing me out of a party I paid to host, is that civil?" Tiffany burst into tears. They streamed down her face as she shook uncontrollably, but pity was nowhere to be found in the room. Everyone remembered she was the one who ignited the cruel spectacle of humiliation. Ariana, Tiffany sobbed. "I am sorry I did not know. I didn't." Ariana silenced her with a single glance. "The frightening part is not that you didn't know who I was," she said. "The frightening part is that if I really had been a lost server, you still believed you had the right to treat me that way." The words sliced through the crowd, forcing several guests to lower their eyes, as if looking at Ariana meant confronting the ugliest parts of themselves. Carter could barely stand straight as he stammered, his voice cracking. "Fine. Fine, Ariana. You've made your point. We were wrong. We admit it. What do you want? Money? A new contract? A title? Name it, and it is yours." The stupidity of the question made the room tighten even further. Guests sighed, some shaking their heads. They understood far more clearly than Carter did that Ariana was not here to bargain for wealth. She was here for something money could never buy: dignity. Ariana lowered her hand slightly, looking at Carter as one might look at a child who never learned a single lesson life tried to teach him. "I do not need your money," she said, "and I certainly do not need your pity. I am doing the one thing this world should have done long ago, putting you exactly where you belong." Carter opened his mouth to protest, but before he could utter a word, every phone in the ballroom buzzed at once. Notifications exploded across the room in a wave of glowing screens, and within seconds the murmurs grew into frantic whispers. "The news, they are reporting it. My God, look at this. Wellington family under severe ethical investigation. There is video. The wine, all of it is recorded. No, this cannot be real." Carter snatched a phone from a nearby guest, his eyes widening in horror as he watched clip after clip of the party flood every major platform from TikTok to Instagram to live news streams showing Tiffany and Carter humiliating Ariana. The headline cut deeper than any weapon. "Wellington family publicly humiliates honor. Guest $5 billion investor strikes back on the spot." Sweat poured down Carter's temples. Tiffany collapsed into a chair, clutching her chest. Eleanor froze like marble, unable to blink. Ariana watched them, not with cruelty, but with a sorrow so deep it felt carved into her bones. "This is not revenge," she said quietly. "This is consequence." Then she lifted the phone again, her voice steady as the moment she first stepped into the hall. "I confirm Phase 4. The man on the line responded instantly. "Understood. All Wellington Group accounts and all personal accounts belonging to the Wellington family will be locked immediately. The press release has been issued. Legal teams await clearance for Phase 5. A collective gasp rippled through the room, like the air had been sucked out of every lung. Phase 5. Tiffany whispered, sounding like a child lost in a nightmare. Ariana did not respond to her. Instead, she looked around the hall again, taking in the gold walls, the priceless paintings, the shimmering chandeliers, everything the Wellington family believed defined their power. Her voice was soft, but it carried to every corner. Power does not come from this room. Power comes from how you treat people. Eleanor took a small, trembling step forward. "Ariana, I am sorry. I truly am. Please stop this." Ariana looked at her for a long time, her gaze empty of hatred, but also empty of forgiveness. "If I had no power tonight," she asked, "would you apologize?" Eleanor said nothing. And that silence, more than the frozen accounts, more than the collapsing empire, was the true judgment passed on the Wellington family. Ariana lifted her phone again. "Give me the progress update." "Yes, Miss Cole," the voice replied. "We are ready for your final command. The Wellington Empire awaits your decision." Every eye in the room locked onto Ariana. Every breath was held, because they all knew whatever she said next would rewrite the fate of an entire dynasty, and even her silence was enough to make the whole room tremble. The gold-leafed ballroom of Wellington Estate remained frozen in place, even though only minutes ago it had echoed with laughter, clinking glasses, elegant music, and venomous mockery. Now the city's most powerful people huddled together like children, caught doing something unforgivable, while Ariana Cole, the woman they had humiliated, stood as the sole center of every gaze. Those eyes no longer held disdain. They held fear, respect, and the late, crushing realization that power did not always wear a glittering gown or carry a prestigious surname. Sometimes it lived in the quiet composure of someone who had spent a lifetime being underestimated. When Ariana raised her phone to her ear, that single motion made Tiffany flinch, made Eleanor forget to breathe, and made Carter clench his fists so tightly the veins stood out like ropes. The voice on the other end spoke again, low and sharp. "We are ready. Simply awaiting your authorization for Phase 5. Those words sent the dazzling ballroom plummeting into an invisible abyss. Phase 5. No one knew exactly what it meant, but everyone understood it was nothing they wanted to hear. Ariana did not answer immediately. She lowered her hand, her gaze sweeping the room like a cold wind, tearing through layers of manufactured elegance. The diamonds on Eleanor's neck no longer sparkled, but looked like heavy stones dragging her down. Tiffany trembled. Her makeup streaked her hands, desperately clinging to the fading illusion of the status she had taken for granted all her life. Carter breathed in short, ragged gasps, stripped of every trace of arrogance. Ariana took one step toward them, just one, yet the entire room seemed to recoil. "Before I confirm anything," she said, her voice calm but resonant like a metal bell, "I want you to understand why tonight happened." Silence tightened around them. Only distant music from the garden drifted in, sounding like the slowing heartbeat of an empire on the verge of collapse. Many people think cruelty is power, Ariana continued. But in truth, it is the mark of weakness. It reveals that you cannot build anything lasting, only crush what stands in your way. Liam, standing at the edge of the banquet table, watched her with profound respect. He had never seen someone stand unshaken among wolves, and he had never understood more clearly that one honest voice could silence an entire room when it spoke a truth everyone feared to face. Ariana turned to Eleanor. "You said I slipped in here looking for free wine." Eleanor lowered her head, but Ariana did not allow her to hide. "Do you know how many people outside these walls endure that same humiliation every day? How many are doubted, judged, dismissed, simply because they do not fit someone's idea of what belongs?" Eleanor trembled. I did not exactly," Ariana replied. "You did not know, and you never wanted to know." Then she faced Tiffany, still wiping tears from her cheeks. "You poured the wine. You laughed in my face. But what disappoints me most is not your actions. It is that you believed that cruelty was normal. You believed no one would ever stand up to you." Tiffany broke down crying, but no one moved to comfort her. Those who once cheered her cruelty now turned away, ashamed of the part they played. Carter stepped forward, trying to salvage a shred of composure. "Ariana, we were wrong. But you are taking this too far. A fund withdrawal, a freeze order, it could destroy thousands of innocent employees." Ariana looked at him, her eyes carrying a sorrow no one expected. "Do you think I do not know that he stopped short? Do you think I am doing this for personal satisfaction? Do you think I want anyone to suffer for this?" The room fell into a suffocating stillness. "I gave your father 3 chances," Ariana said. "I issued internal warnings. I filed ethical reports. I requested a private meeting. The 3 Wellingtons looked as if reality had struck them like a blow. He ignored every one of them." Ariana lowered her voice, but the weight of her words made the walls seem to tremble. "He told me, 'You are not one of us. You do not understand our rules.'" Ariana met Carter's eyes directly, unflinching. "Tonight I proved he was right. About one thing, I do not belong to the ruthless world your family created." The onlookers inhaled sharply, as though seeing the true nature of the elite for the first time. Then Ariana raised her phone again. The room felt as though it turned to dust. Miss Cole, the voice on the line, asked, "Do you wish to proceed with Phase 5? Tiffany sobbed, "Please, please stop." Eleanor grabbed Carter's hand, shaking like someone standing before a death sentence. Carter tried to stay upright, but his eyes were already defeated. Ariana looked at them for a long time. The fire of anger was gone from her expression, replaced by something heavier disappointment, and the pain of someone who once believed change was possible, only to witness repeated cruelty instead. "Phase 5, Ariana said slowly, "is not meant to destroy your family." A flicker of hope lit Tiffany's eyes. Ariana met her gaze, extinguishing it. "Phase 5 is meant. So the world out there, everyone who has ever been humiliated, silenced, dismissed, can finally see the truth." She lifted the phone. The entire room froze, and Ariana spoke the words none of them ever imagined they would hear. "I confirm Phase 5. No screaming, no breaking down, no chaos. Only a silence so profound it became the funeral hymn for a dynasty that once believed it was untouchable." And Ariana Cole stood in the center of that storm, not as a conqueror, but as someone who had waited her whole life for this moment of justice. The notification, "Phase 5 has been activated," rang through the air like a death knell for the entire Wellington family. The powerful guests, people who adored grand displays of status and always believed themselves aligned with the winning side, now quietly stepped back, distancing themselves from the hosts as if avoiding the blast radius of an explosion they were never prepared for. Ariana Cole stood at the center of the room, not angry, not trembling, not triumphant, but calm with the quiet understanding of someone who had weathered too many storms to mistake this night for revenge. This was simply the inevitable consequence of years in which the Wellingtons had poured cruelty into the world. Phones buzzed again throughout the hall, their screens casting pale light across shaken faces. Each new alert carved deeper into the glossy facade of the Wellington Empire press release issued Wellington Group under investigation for severe ethical violations. Coal Industries officially withdraws full investment. Wellington Family Trust assets temporarily frozen. Major partners request emergency meetings to reassess contracts. A real estate tycoon, normally one of the most imposing figures in any room, glanced at Tiffany and quickly turned away, trying to maintain composure even as his hand shook so badly he nearly dropped his glass. Another investor edged toward the exit while whispering into his phone, "Cut losses now. Do not stay involved." Those words sliced into the Wellingtons. But what made Eleanor lose her breath was the look in the eyes of people who once praised her. Now they regarded her with caution, as though being near her might pull them under as well. Carter slammed his fist onto the table, the sharp crack startling several guests. Impossible. Just one woman like you dares, Ariana did not let him finish. She turned toward him slowly, her gaze calm as the surface of a lake before a storm. You refuse to accept that this ending is the result of your own actions. Carter stepped forward, shouting, "All of this over something so small. You are destroying our future." Something small. Ariana repeated her voice, dropping into a dark, steady warning. Pouring wine on a woman because you think she is beneath you. Humiliating someone because of her clothing. Mocking a person because of her skin. That is small to you, Carter faltered, stepping back, trying desperately to cling to what remained of his pride. Fine, I apologize. There, I said it. We are sorry. Everything can Ariana cut him off. An apology is not a magic spell that erases what you have done, especially one that only appears after your power is threatened. Her words poured shame over the entire room, heavier than anything they had ever felt. Tiffany collapsed into a chair, clutching her dress, trembling violently. She had believed an apology would soften things, but now under Ariana's gaze, a gaze without vengeance, but far more painful, she knew all excuses were meaningless. "I did not mean to hurt anyone," Tiffany whispered, desperate for forgiveness. "I just didn't think. That is the problem," Ariana said. "You do not think. You have never thought about the feelings or dignity of others because you believe you stand above them." Eleanor braced herself against the table, breathing unevenly. "Ariana, I beg you do not destroy my family. Give us a chance to fix this." Ariana tilted her head, her eyes narrowing though her voice remained soft. "Do you know how many chances I and millions of people like me have lost because of behavior like yours?" Eleanor's voice shook. "No one is perfect," no, Ariana replied, "but cruelty has never been an accident." In a corner of the room, Liam stood silently, unable to look away. To him, Ariana looked like a warrior, without armor or weapons. Yet somehow she bent the entire room with her presence alone. In his eyes, she was more than admirable, she was hope. Because tonight, for the first time, he understood just how powerful truth could be when it stood upright. Another chime echoed through the room as a fresh wave of emails arrived on the guests' phones, this time even more devastating. Exclusive investigation evidence of discriminatory culture inside Wellington Group exposed. Videos from the gala spreading at record speed. Civil rights organizations demand intervention. Tiffany grabbed her head, sobbing uncontrollably. We are finished, all of it. Everything. Carter's breathing became erratic. You do not understand. Wellington Group is the backbone of this city's economy. If we fall, Ariana looked him straight in the eyes. If an empire collapses because it is asked to be decent, then it deserves to collapse. For the first time, the silent guests began to speak. An elegantly dressed older woman stood up. Ariana, I laughed when they humiliated you. I was wrong. But what you are doing tonight is what the world needs. Several others nodded. Support spread across the room like a spark catching fire in the Wellington family's paper kingdom. Eleanor stepped forward, each movement heavy with pride she was forcing herself to swallow. Ariana, if you want us to change, we will change. Just give us a path to stand again. Ariana studied her for a long moment. And for the first time that night, the silence shifted, no longer sharp but heavy, as though she was weighing not just the fate of Wellington Group, but the fate of a part of herself as well. I will not destroy your family, she said at last, and the room exhaled in a fragile wave of relief. But then she added, her voice firm as a final judgment. But your family will face the consequences. Not because I desire it, but because justice demands it. Eleanor collapsed into a chair. Ariana turned toward the guests, her voice carrying across the room. Tonight is not simply the downfall of one family. It is a warning for all of us. If power is the only reason you choose kindness, then you have never understood kindness at all. Ariana's phone buzzed again. This time, no one dared to breathe as she lifted it. Miss Cole, the voice said, Phase 5 is complete. Wellington Group has been officially suspended across the entire system. We are awaiting authorization to initiate Phase 6. Shock rippled through the room. Phase 6, someone whispered. But Ariana closed her eyes for a single moment. She knew. Phase 6 was not meant for the Wellingtons. It was meant for the world, meant for everyone who had ever stood where she once stood. And when she opened her eyes again, that look signaled the beginning of an entirely new chapter in the storm of justice she had unleashed. A chapter no one in that room was ready to face. But Ariana had been preparing for it her whole life. The gold-lined ballroom of Wellington Estate felt like a giant glass cage, forcing everyone inside to witness the transformation of power itself. No longer the kind built on wealth or lineage, but the kind born from truth, justice, and a dignity that had been dismissed for far too long. When Ariana Cole opened her eyes, after that brief moment of stillness, the entire room froze like statues. No one daring to move. No one daring to breathe, because they sensed that what was about to happen would not only decide the fate of the Wellington family, but mark a turning point for an entire elite society that had grown too accustomed to standing on others without consequence. Ariana still held the phone to her ear, yet she had not answered the person on the other end. She released a slow breath, so slow it stretched the moment, as if time itself had grown heavier with every passing second. Eleanor gripped the edge of her chair, her hands trembling uncontrollably. Tiffany kept her head, bowed, tears falling endlessly, as though she were crying, not just from shame, but for the arrogant version of herself she now finally saw clearly for what it was. Carter paced like a caged lion, eyes red with anger and desperation, with nowhere left to unleash either one. You do not understand," Carter choked out. "You do not understand the consequences of this. It is not just us. Tens of thousands of employees, hundreds of families could be affected." Ariana turned to him, her gaze calm, though a rare flicker of compassion glimmered behind it. "I do understand," she said. "And because I understand, I filed 3 ethics reports, 3 warnings, 3 chances for your family to do the right thing before the point of no return." The room fell silent again. Ariana spoke even more slowly. "But no one in your family cared. You assumed I would stay silent because you believed you were powerful. You assumed I would tolerate it because I needed your partnership. You assumed I would bow my head because I am a woman of color stepping into a room owned by wealthy white privilege." Her eyes sharpened like a blade, slicing through the unspoken truths that everyone knew, but never dared to say aloud. "But you were wrong." Liam, standing near the banquet table, watched Ariana with deep admiration, as if he were witnessing one of the defining moments of his life, proof that an ordinary person could become a witness to an empire's transformation. The voice on the phone returned. "Miss Cole, we require confirmation. Phase 6 is ready for deployment." Tiffany let out a strangled sob. "What is Phase 6? What else could there possibly be?" "We have nothing left to lose." Ariana turned to her meeting, her swollen eyes, and streaked mascara. "Phase 6, Ariana said quietly, is not what you think." The room went completely still. Ariana continued. "Phase 6 is not meant for destruction. Phase 6 is meant for transformation." Carter frowned in confusion. "Transformation," Ariana nodded once. "Transformation of power, responsibility, and truth. Phase 6 does not aim to crush anyone. It is the step that allows rebuilding." Eleanor blinked rapidly, trying to grasp the meaning behind Ariana's words. You would give us a chance," Ariana held her gaze. "A chance to rebuild, not a chance to keep your old privileges." Carter sputtered. "But you froze everything. You pulled your investment, my family will. If an empire collapses because one investor steps away," Ariana said, "then it was never stable to begin with." The words struck Carter's pride like a bullet, but he no longer had the strength to argue. Ariana lifted the phone slightly. "Give me the Phase 6 report." "Yes, Miss Cole," the voice replied. "Phase 6 contains 3 steps. 1 full public disclosure of all leadership misconduct within Wellington Group. 2, the creation of an independent ethics oversight council. 3, redirecting investment funds into a community support initiative per your directive." The room erupted in whispers. Some guests exchanged glances. She is not destroying, she is rebuilding. But this will completely change the Wellington Group. Perhaps that is what it needed all along. Tiffany raised her head, voice trembling. "Ariana, you would really do that?" "You are not wiping us out," Ariana answered. "I do not erase people. Tiffany, I erase cruelty that you believed was normal." Whispered support spread across the room, like a wind sweeping across dry fields. Several guests stepped closer to Ariana, as though choosing a side. A middle-aged man in a grey suit, president of a major investment fund, spoke up Miss Cole. "If you establish a new ethics council, I am willing to serve on it." A woman in a red gown said softly, "You are doing what many of us have wished someone would do for years." The support grew flickering like flame across the Wellington Empire's fragile foundation. Carter staggered, stunned. Everyone is taking her side," Ariana replied. "Not my side, the right side, The soft chandelier light reflected off her face, giving her the quiet glow of someone standing firmly in truth. Then she turned back to the phone, her voice unwavering. "I confirm Phase 6. "Phase 6 is now underway," the voice responded. A cascade of new notifications sounded across the room. New Ethics Council established. Community Support Fund initiated. Wellington Group restructuring announcement released to the press. Coal Industries pledges support for the transition. The room vibrated faintly, like a massive body taking its first clear breath after years of suffocation. Ariana lowered her phone, her eyes locking onto the Wellington family. "This is your final chance," she said. "Not to keep your power, but to become better people." Eleanor broke down in tears, not the proud tears of a matriarch, but the raw, painful sobs of someone who finally realized she had contributed to darkness. Tiffany nodded repeatedly, as though afraid stopping would make her collapse. Carter stood motionless for the first time, not arguing, not shouting, just facing it. Ariana looked at them, not with the gaze of a victor, but with the gaze of someone who understood that sometimes the greatest punishment is granting someone the chance to live with the consequences of their own actions. And when she turned to walk away, the entire room parted for her, not out of fear, but out of respect. Because everyone understood one truth with absolute clarity. Tonight was not the night a family fell. It was the night justice was redefined. And Ariana Cole had written that chapter with her pain, her resolve, and her unshakable belief in what was right. The gold-plated ballroom of Wellington Estate felt like a giant glass cage where everyone was being forced to witness the unraveling of power, no longer the old kind built on wealth and lineage, but the kind born from truth, justice, and a dignity that had been dismissed for far too long. As Ariana Cole opened her eyes after that moment of stillness, the people in the room stood frozen, afraid to move or even breathe, sensing that what was about to happen would not only decide the fate of the Wellington family, but mark a turning point for an upper class, too accustomed to standing above others without ever paying a price. Ariana still held the phone to her ear, though she had not yet answered the person on the line. She exhaled slowly, so slowly that time itself felt stretched and heavy with each passing second. Eleanor clung to the edge of her chair, her hands trembling without control. Tiffany kept her head, bowed, tears falling non-stop, as though mourning something bigger than shame, perhaps mourning the arrogant version of herself she finally saw clearly for how ugly it truly was. Carter paced like a trapped lion, eyes red with rage and despair, but with nowhere left to release either. You do not understand," Carter stammered, his voice cracking. "You do not understand the consequences of this. It is not just us. Tens of thousands of employees, hundreds of families will be affected." Ariana turned toward him, her gaze steady, carrying a rare flicker of compassion. "I do understand," she said. "And because I understand, I filed 3 ethics reports, 3 warnings, 3 opportunities for your family to correct course before everything became irreversible." The room went silent. Ariana continued at a slower pace, each word hitting the air with weight. "But no one in your family cared. You assumed I would stay quiet because you believed you were powerful. You assumed I would endure because I needed your partnership. You assumed I would bow my head because I am a woman of color walking into a room owned by wealthy white privilege." Her eyes sharpened like a blade, cutting through the truth everyone knew, but never spoke aloud. "But you were wrong." Liam watched from the banquet table's edge, eyes filled with something like pride, as though witnessing one of the defining moments of his life, the moment proving that ordinary people could become witnesses to the transformation of an empire. The voice on the phone returned. "Miss Cole, we need confirmation. Phase 6 is ready." Tiffany let out a small, broken sob. "What is Phase 6? What else could there be? We have nothing left to lose." Ariana turned toward her, looking into her swollen eyes and mascara-streaked face. "Phase 6, Ariana said softly, is not what you think." The room held its breath. Ariana continued, "Phase 6 is not meant to destroy. Phase 6 is meant to shift." Carter frowned. "Shift what shift? Power, shift responsibility, shift truth," Ariana said. "Phase 6 is not about knocking anyone down. It is the step that allows rebuilding." Eleanor blinked rapidly, trying to understand. You are giving us a chance." Ariana studied her. "A chance to rebuild, not a chance to keep your old privileges," Carter burst out. "But you froze everything. You withdrew the investment. My family will. If an empire collapses because one investor walks away," Ariana said quietly, "then it was never stable to begin with." The words struck Carter deeper than any loss of money. Ariana lifted the phone. "Report on Phase 6. "Yes, Miss Cole," the voice responded. "Phase 6 includes 3 steps. 1 full transparency on misconduct within Wellington Group. 2 creation of an independent ethics oversight council. 3 redirecting funds toward a community support initiative per your directive." Whispers rippled through the ballroom. She is not destroying, she is rebuilding. This could completely reshape Wellington Group. Maybe that is exactly what it needed. Tiffany lifted her head, voice trembling. "Ariana, you would really do that?" "You are not erasing us," Ariana replied. "I erase nothing, Tiffany. I only erase the cruelty you believed was normal." Soft murmurs of support began spreading through the room. A middle-aged man in a grey suit stepped forward. "Miss Cole, if you are forming an ethics council, I offer to serve." A woman in a silver gown added, "You are doing what we wished someone would do long ago." Support gathered like a warm wind, rising against the cold ruins of Wellington's dying empire. Carter staggered. Everyone is on her side," Ariana answered. "Not on my side." "On the side of what is right." Light from the chandeliers reflected across her face like a quiet halo. Then she turned back to the phone. "I confirm Phase 6. Phase 6 is now active," the voice replied. Notifications chimed throughout the room. "New Ethics Council established. Community Support Fund announced. Wellington Group restructuring distributed to press. Coal Industries pledges restructuring assistance." The ballroom trembled faintly, like a massive body finally releasing a long-held breath. Ariana lowered her phone and faced the Wellington family. "This is your final chance," she said. "Not to keep power, but to become better people." Eleanor burst into tears, real ones, stripped of pride. Tiffany nodded repeatedly, fighting not to break down completely. Carter stood still, not arguing, not shouting, simply facing the truth. Ariana looked at them, not as a conqueror, but as someone who knew that sometimes the greatest punishment was allowing someone to live with the consequences of their own actions. Then she turned to walk away, and the crowd parted for her, not out of fear, but out of profound respect. Because everyone now understood tonight was not the fall of a family, it was the rebirth of justice, and Ariana Cole had written the first chapter of this new era, with her pain, her resolve, and her unshakable belief in what is right. The gold-lined ballroom of Wellington Estate felt like a massive glass chamber where everyone was being forced to witness the rebirth of power, no longer the old kind built on wealth and lineage, but the kind forged from truth, justice, and a dignity that had been overlooked for far too long. As Ariana Cole stepped slowly back toward the center of the hall, every gaze followed her, as if she held the fate of all of them in her hands. The grandeur of Wellington Estate suddenly felt small, almost meaningless, because real power was no longer in the marble walls or the glittering chandeliers. It was in Ariana's steady breath, in the absolute calm of a woman who understood that justice was not noise, but choice. Her phone lit up again, requesting confirmation for Phase 7. The hall sank into such heavy silence that the faint tremble of the crystal light fixtures could be heard. Tiffany, her face streaked with tears, whispered, "Phase 7. What does it mean?" Carter stared at Ariana, waiting for the final verdict, the one that might drown his entire family in an ocean of failure unlike anything they had ever imagined. But Ariana looked at them not as enemies. She looked at them like someone who had always known this ending was inevitable, yet still hoped they could understand that what she was doing was not meant to destroy, but to free. Phase 7. Ariana said her voice, so even it sent a chill through the room, is removing power from those who used it to harm others. Eleanor choked on her breath, trying to step forward, but her legs had grown weak under the weight of the collapsing world she once thought unshakable. You are going to take everything?" she asked, trembling. "No." Ariana answered her gaze, piercing but gentler than before. "I will take only what you never deserved to have." A ripple of murmurs swept through the room. Phase 7. Ariana continued, is the transfer of power. The room erupted in silence, so intense it felt like an explosion without sound. She inhaled deeply and looked directly at the Wellington family. "Starting tonight, the new Oversight Council will assume temporary control of Wellington Group. Your family will not be bankrupted. You will not be erased. But you will no longer make the decisions. You will start again from the bottom." Carter staggered, as if someone had struck him in the chest. You want us to become employees?" Ariana held his gaze sharp as truth itself. "Not employees, learners." Tiffany's eyes widened. "Learners?" "Yes," Ariana said. "You will undergo mandatory training in corporate ethics, respect, equality, and social responsibility. Only when the council certifies that you have changed will you be allowed to return to your former positions." The room fell silent again. No laughter, no applause. Because everyone understood this was not humiliation, this was a second chance, a rare one. Ariana looked at each member of the Wellington family as if engraving her next words into their bones. The real punishment is not losing money. The real punishment is being forced to face who you truly are. A long, heavy pause followed. Then, unexpectedly, a quiet clap echoed from a corner of the room. It was Robert Hale. He stood, tall eyes bright. "Miss Cole," he said, his voice ringing with clarity, "this is not revenge. This is the evolution of justice." A woman in a silver gown nodded. "Yes. This is exactly what the world needs." More applause rose, spreading through the hall like a warm wave. But these were not applause for spectacle. They were applause for understanding, for respect, for awakening. The Wellington family stood at the center of that wave, like survivors of a storm they had never believed could reach them. Tiffany cried into her hands, and for the first time, it was not from fear, but from realization. Eleanor breathed heavily, no longer clinging to meaningless pride. She was no longer resisting. She was absorbing the truth. And Carter, who once believed his voice could command an entire city, now stood still like a lost child amidst the ruins he had helped create. Ariana looked at them, not with triumph, but with depth so profound that everyone who met her eyes felt as if she could see straight through the masks they wore. "Justice is not destruction," she said softly, her voice settling over the room like a closing statement. "Justice is giving people the chance to become better." Then she lifted her phone and pressed a single button. "Confirm Phase 7. The system's voice came through clearly, Phase 7 activated. Wellington Group entering full restructuring mode. And in that moment, everyone understood the Wellington Empire was not ending. It was being reborn. But not under the hands of those who had allowed it to rot. It would rise under the guidance of the justice Ariana had fought to awaken. As she lowered the phone, the entire room instinctively parted to create a path for her, the same way people would clear the way for a judge who had just delivered a verdict destined to be remembered. No one spoke. No one whispered. Because they all knew tonight they had not only witnessed the transformation of one family, they had witnessed the transformation of the world they lived in. And with every step Ariana took toward the exit, it felt as though each footprint left on the marble floor was engraving the moment justice found its voice again. The moment Ariana Cole walked down the long hallway, leading out of the Wellington Estate ballroom, the air behind her still vibrated with the weight of everything that had just unfolded. The click of her heels against the marble floor was crisp and steady, but within each step was the imprint of a woman who had just reset the standard for an entire world that once dismissed her. Inside the ballroom, the crowd remained frozen, as if afraid that even one abrupt movement might shatter the truth that had just been laid bare like a fragile, brilliant crystal. But truth didn't disappear. It was spreading through every inch of the air, across every phone screen, through every whisper of those who had witnessed a moment that history would remember not in gold, but in the courage of a woman humiliated on the very stage that belonged to those who thought themselves untouchable. Outside the great doors, the night wind drifted across the perfectly trimmed lawn, carrying the scent of hydrangeas from the garden the Wellington family often flaunted to the press. But tonight, its beauty served as the perfect contrast to the arrogance that had been stripped away inside. Ariana paused at the top of the steps and drew in a long breath. Not to steady herself, but to fully feel the moment she had spent 30 years fighting her way toward. Memories she had endured flashed through her mind, like film rolling backward, the suspicious stare of a banker when she handed over her card, the mocking tone of a security guard when she entered a conference, the soft chuckles behind her as she walked into a boardroom wearing a suit that was not designer. Those wounds had never vanished. They had slept beneath the armor built from relentless effort. Tonight they were no longer pain. They had become strength. The doors behind her opened again. Light footsteps echoed across the stone. Liam Barnes hurried out, his face a mix of urgency and respect. Miss Cole he called breathless. Ariana turned, her expression softening at the sight of him, the one person who had dared to speak when no one else found the courage. "You do not need to apologize," she said, before he could speak. "You did what was right when it was hardest." Liam swallowed a tight emotion rising in his throat. "I just thought if no one said anything." Ariana placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, her eyes warm with sincerity. The world changes not because of those with power. It changes because of ordinary people who choose to do what is right. Liam's eyes glistened, and he nodded firmly, as if committing her words to memory. "If you ever need help," Ariana added, "come find me. Coal Industries always has space for people with courage." Liam smiled, the first real smile he had shown all night. Ariana turned away and descended the steps. At that moment, the doors behind her swung open, wide golden light spilling out, and framed within them stood the Wellington family. No arrogance, no masks. Just three people stripped bare of their illusions, finally seeing the darkness they had carried. Eleanor stepped forward, her voice raspy but steady. "Ariana, thank you." That sentence, spoken in the night wind, amid the ruins of their power, was not empty. It was acceptance. Ariana looked at her and nodded. "Prove you deserve the chance I left you." Tiffany held her arms tight around herself, as if holding together the pieces of a life torn apart, but handed back to her in a different form. "I will change," she said. "No tears this time, only trembling determination." Carter stood slightly behind them, his eyes no longer defiant, just quiet acceptance of responsibility. And Ariana knew that sometimes breaking down was the only path toward rebuilding. The headlights of the limousine near the gate cast a soft glow across the path. As Ariana moved toward the light, the guests still lingering inside the ballroom began to look at one another, no longer with silence but with clarity. Someone said aloud, "Starting tomorrow, we have to be different." Another voice followed, "We cannot let what happened tonight repeat itself in any room, anywhere." And then one by one they left the ballroom with eyes not filled with pride, but with reflection. That night, Wellington Estate lost its old glory. But it became the birthplace of an awakening in a world that had been asleep in privilege and indifference for far too long. When Ariana opened the car door, the night breeze swept through her hair, carrying with it the echo of a chapter that had just closed. But deep in her eyes, a new chapter was unfolding, not for the Wellington family, but for all those who had ever been belittled, mocked, pushed aside. A chapter beginning with a simple truth, that justice does not need to be loud to create change. It only needs one person brave enough to stand up. And tonight, that person was Ariana Cole. From the perspective of a specialist in organizational behavior and power dynamics, Ariana Cole's story reveals a truth many people prefer to avoid. Power is not built on wealth status or gleaming marble walls, but measured by how we treat those who have nothing except their dignity. The evening at Wellington Estate was not merely the downfall of a single family. It was a reflection of society itself, where indifference allows wrongdoing to grow, and where the courage of one person at the right moment can shift the entire balance of justice. Ariana did not prevail through retaliation. She prevailed through steadfastness, through holding on to her dignity, even when an entire room tried to strip it away. That is an invaluable lesson for any organization or individual who holds authority. If the foundation is built on arrogance and the devaluation of others, then a single exposed truth is enough to make it crumble. Yet the most beautiful part of this story is not the punishment, but the way justice created space for transformation. Phase 7 did not destroy it, restructured. It did not close doors, it opened a path for people to become better. That is why Ariana's journey is not only inspiring, it reminds us of a fundamental principle that real power means creating positive change, even when we have every reason to seek revenge. If this story resonates with you, if it makes you reflect on how we treat one another each day, take a second to press. Like to support the stories that need to be told. Remember to subscribe to the channel to follow the journeys where justice is not just spoken about, but seen, felt, and carried out. And before you leave this video, I want to ask you one thing. If you have ever witnessed or experienced injustice, and you believe that kindness is the true foundation of strength, leave a comment with the phrase, "Justice first." Let the world see that we still believe in what is right.